The November wind cut through the streets of Spokane, Washington Territory, with the kind of bite that made bones ache, and Penelope Jenkins sat at her battered upright piano on the corner of Howard Street. Her fingers blew despite the threadbare gloves she wore with the fingertips cut away. It was 1877, and the Silver Rush had brought enough people through this growing railroad town to make her daily earnings just enough to afford a corner in Mrs. Whitmore's boarding house and a meal every other day, but not enough to escape the cold that seemed to seep into her very soul with each passing November afternoon. The coins in the chipped porcelain bowl beside her music sheets amounted to 37 cents, and it was already past 3 o'clock. She played Beethoven because it made her feel closer to her father, who had taught her on a grand piano in Boston before consumption took him 6 years ago. Her mother had followed him into death just 8 months later, leaving Penelope at 18 to fend for herself in a world that offered few respectable options for a woman alone. She had sold everything except the piano, packed it onto a train heading west with the last of her inheritance, and ended up here in Spokane, where at least the mining traffic kept coins falling into her bowl. Her breath came out in white puffs as she played, and she tried not to think about how the cold made her joints stiff, how much harder it was to strike the keys with precision when she could barely feel her fingers. A group of miners walked past without dropping anything, and she transitioned into a livelier tune, something that might catch their attention, but they were already gone, laughing about something she could not hear. That was when she saw him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy wool coat that looked actually warm, unlike her own thin shawl. His hat was pulled low, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He stopped directly in front of her piano, not walking past like most people did, but actually stopping to listen. Penelope felt her cheeks flush, though whether from the cold or his attention, she could not say. She finished the piece, her fingers stumbling slightly on the final notes, nervous under his steady gaze. When she looked up fully, she found herself staring into the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with weathered skin that spoke of days spent outdoors and a kindness in his expression that seemed out of place in the rough streets of Spokane. "That was beautiful," he said, his voice a deep rumble that somehow cut through the wind. "How long have you been out here?" "Since this morning," Penelope answered, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. "I play every day except Sundays." He frowned, glancing at the sky, which had turned that particular shade of gray that promised snow. "You are going to freeze to death out here." "Does not anyone in this town have a lick of sense?" "I manage," she said, straightening her spine despite the cold. She had learned early that pity rarely translated into actual help, and pride was sometimes all she had left. "Manage," he repeated, and there was something in his tone that was not pity but genuine concern. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting a silver dollar that he placed in her bowl. It was more than she usually made in 3 days. "Thank you, sir," she said, stunned. Harrison Yates. I own the ranch about 5 miles north of town, up near the Spokane River. I came in for supplies." He paused, looking at the piano, then at her, then back at the piano. "This is going to sound strange, miss, but I have a proposition for you." Penelope stiffened. She had heard propositions before, always declined them, always would. He must have seen something in her face because he held up his hands. "Nothing improper, I promise. I built my house 3 years ago, and it has a parlor that is too empty. My mother passed when I was young, and my father died last spring. The house needs music, and you need to be out of this cold. I would pay you to play piano at my ranch in the warm, where your fingers would not turn blue. You would have your own room, meals, and a proper wage. It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Why would you do that? Because my mother loved music, and before she died, she made me promise that if I ever had the means, I would fill our home with it. I have the means now. The ranch does well. I have 3 men working for me, good men who would respect you. There is a housekeeper, Mrs. Callahan, who is a proper chaperone. Everything would be above board. You want to hire me to play piano, Penelope said slowly, trying to understand. I want to hire you to bring music into my home. And frankly, I cannot stand watching you freeze out here another day. I have been in town 3 times this month, and every time I see you, you look colder. It is not right. The wind chose that moment to gust particularly hard, nearly blowing her sheet music away. Harrison caught the papers before they could scatter, handing them back to her carefully. At least come see the place before you decide, he said. I have my wagon around the corner. I could drive you out. You could meet Mrs. Callahan, see the piano I have, and if you do not like it, I will bring you right back to town. No obligation. Penelope looked down at her blue fingers, at the 37 cents plus $1 silver in her bowl, at the piano that was showing signs of warping from constant exposure to the elements. She looked up at Harrison Yates, at his honest face and concerned eyes, and made a decision that terrified and excited her in equal measure. All right, she said. I will come look. The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine, and for the first time in months, Penelope felt something warm in her chest that had nothing to do with temperature. Harrison enlisted the help of 2 men from the nearby livery to load the piano onto his wagon. It was a massive undertaking, requiring ropes and ramps and careful maneuvering, but he directed the operation with patient authority, never raising his voice, always saying please and thank you. Penelope watched, clutching her music sheets and the small bag that contained everything she owned, amazed that this was actually happening. The wagon was sturdy and well-made, pulled by 2 strong draft horses. Harrison helped her up onto the seat, and she was grateful for the relative shelter from the wind. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue to get the horses moving. Tell me about yourself, miss, he said as they left the main street of Spokane behind. Jenkins. Penelope Jenkins. I came here from Boston 2 years ago after my parents died. I thought the West might offer opportunities. Has it? She laughed, though there was little humor in it. It has offered me cold street corners and the occasional kind donation. But I am alive, which is more than some can say. Boston is a long way from here. Sometimes distance is necessary. She did not elaborate, and he did not push, which she appreciated. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape opening up around them. The Spokane River glinted in the weak afternoon light, and pine trees stretched toward the gray sky. Despite the cold, there was a stark beauty to it all that Penelope had never quite allowed herself to appreciate when she was worried about survival. What about you? She asked. Have you always lived here? My father came out in '65 after the war. He had been a Union soldier, saw too much death, wanted open space and clean air. He claimed land under the Homestead Act, built a cabin, and sent for my mother and me. We came out in '66. I was 14. That must have been quite an adjustment. It was, but my father was right about the land. There is something healing about it, about working with your hands and watching things grow. We started with cattle, just a few head, and built from there. Now I have over 200 head and some of the best grazing land in the territory. There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from earned accomplishment rather than arrogance. Penelope found herself relaxing slightly, the warmth from his body next to hers on the wagon seat cutting the worst of the wind. Your mother, she said carefully, What was she like? Harrison's expression softened. Kind, strong. She hated the isolation at first, missed Philadelphia where she grew up, but she adapted. She taught me to read and write, insisted I learn arithmetic and history even though there were no schools nearby. She sang while she worked. Old hymns, mostly, but sometimes other songs. Irish ballads from her grandmother. How long has she been gone? 12 years. Influenza swept through the territory in '65. She did not survive it. His hands tightened on the reins briefly. My father never really recovered. He worked himself into the ground, I think, to avoid feeling too much. He built that house for her, you know. She had always lived in the cabin, said it was fine, but he wanted to give her something better. He finished it in '74, and she got to live in it for almost a year before she died. I am sorry, Penelope said, and meant it. Thank you. It was a long time ago, but some losses stay with you. Yes, she agreed quietly, thinking of her own parents. They do. They crested a hill and Harrison pointed ahead. There, that is home. The house was larger than Penelope had expected. A proper 2-story structure painted white with green shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and smoke curled from 2 chimneys. Behind it stood a large barn and several outbuildings. Fences marked off pastures where cattle grazed, dark shapes against the brown grass. It is beautiful, she said honestly. It is home, Harrison replied, and there was such warmth in his voice that Penelope felt her heart skip. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50, with gray streaked brown hair pulled into a bun and a no-nonsense expression that softened when she saw Harrison. About time you got back, she called. I was beginning to think you got lost in town. Then she saw Penelope, and her eyebrows rose. And who might this be? Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop and hopped down, then came around to help Penelope descend. His hands on her waist were gentle but firm, and she found herself blushing again. Mrs. Callahan, this is Miss Penelope Jenkins. She is a pianist from Boston who has been playing on the streets of Spokane. I have invited her to come play here at the house where it is warm. Miss Jenkins, this is Mrs. Callahan, my housekeeper and the person who actually keeps this ranch running despite what I might think. Mrs. Callahan snorted. Flattery. But nice to meet you, Miss Jenkins. She looked Penelope up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing, including the threadbare coat and worn shoes. Playing on the streets in this weather, that is criminal. Come inside, child. You look frozen solid. I should not impose, Penelope started, but Mrs. Callahan was already ushering her toward the house. Nonsense. Harrison, get that piano unloaded with the boys. We will be inside getting Miss Jenkins warm and fed. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. The front door opened into a wide hallway with polished wood floors. To the left was a parlor with large windows, comfortable furniture, and an empty space against the far wall that was clearly meant for a piano. To the right was a formal dining room. Stairs led to the second floor, and the hallway continued back toward what Penelope assumed was the kitchen, given the smells of bread and stew wafting from that direction. Mrs. Callahan led her into the parlor, where a fire crackled in a large stone fireplace. The heat was overwhelming after hours in the cold, and Penelope nearly wept with relief. Sit, Mrs. Callahan commanded, pointing to a chair near the fire. Let me get you some tea. Do not move. Penelope sat, holding her hands out to the warmth, feeling the painful prickle as sensation returned to her fingers. She looked around the room, taking in the details. The furniture was well made but not ostentatious. There were books on shelves, a few framed photographs and curtains that matched the upholstery. It was a room that spoke of comfort and care. Mrs. Callahan returned with a steaming cup of tea and a thick quilt which she draped over Penelope's shoulders. "Drink. Warm up. Then we will talk." "Thank you," Penelope managed, wrapping her hands around the cup and inhaling the steam. "Harrison is a good man," Mrs. Callahan said, settling into the chair opposite. "A bit lonely since his father passed, I think, though he would never admit it. This house is too big for just one person. He works hard, treats his men fair, goes to church when the circuit preacher comes through, but he needs something more than cattle and land. He mentioned wanting music in the house. That is part of it. His mother did love music, that is true. But I think he also cannot stand to see suffering when he has the means to help. He found me after my husband died, offered me this position when I had nowhere to go. Gave Charlie Peterson a job when he came back from the war missing an arm and nobody else would hire him. Took in a stray dog last winter that was half-starved and nursed it back to health. He is a rescuer, our Harrison." Penelope felt a flicker of something that might have been disappointment. Was she just another stray to him? Mrs. Callahan must have seen it on her face because she leaned forward. "Do not mistake me, child. He does not do it for glory or to feel superior. He does it because he genuinely cares, and he has been watching you in town for weeks now, working up the courage to talk to you. I know because he told me about you, about how beautifully you played, about how wrong it was that you were out in the cold. He told you about me, came home the first time he saw you, and could not stop talking about the music. Second time, he mentioned how sad you looked. Third time, he said he was going to do something about it. So here you are." Before Penelope could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway. Male voices, the sound of something heavy being maneuvered, a few choice curse words quickly apologized for. Mrs. Callahan rolled her eyes. "That would be your piano. Let me help guide them so they do not knock anything over." She left, and Penelope stood, moving to the doorway to watch. Harrison and 3 other men were carefully walking her upright piano through the front door. It was an orchestrated chaos of directions and adjustments, but eventually they got it into the parlor and positioned against the wall where the empty space waited. "Perfect," Harrison said, stepping back and wiping his brow despite the cold. He looked at Penelope, his expression hopeful. "What do you think?" She walked to the piano, running her fingers over the familiar keys. Someone had covered it with a tarp during transport, protecting it from the elements. Here, in this warm room, it looked almost noble, like it had been waiting for this moment. "It looks right here," she said softly. "Will you play something?" Harrison asked. "I would love to hear how it sounds in this room." Penelope sat on the bench, removed her gloves fully for the first time in hours, and let her fingers rest on the keys. The piano was slightly out of tune from being outside, but it was still her piano, still responsive to her touch. She chose a Chopin nocturne, something gentle and romantic, and as she played, she watched the room transform. Harrison stood transfixed, his eyes closed, a small smile on his face. Mrs. Callahan had stopped in the doorway, her expression soft. The ranch hands had removed their hats, listening with unexpected reverence. The music filled the space, warm and alive, and Penelope felt something shift inside her chest. When she finished, there was a moment of perfect silence. "That," Harrison said, opening his eyes, "is exactly what this house has been missing. Please say you will stay, Miss Jenkins, at least for a trial period. If you are unhappy, I will take you back to town any time you wish, but please give it a chance." Penelope looked around the warm parlor, at the faces of these strangers who had listened to her music with such appreciation, at the man who had literally carried her piano to safety because he could not stand to see her suffer in the cold. She thought about her corner in Mrs. Whitmore's boarding house, about the frozen mornings and the meager coins, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion. "I will stay," she said, "for a trial period." Harrison's smile could have lit the entire territory. Mrs. Callahan showed Penelope to her room on the second floor, a comfortable space with a real bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the ranch. It was larger than any room Penelope had lived in since leaving Boston, and infinitely warmer. "There is water in the pitcher if you would like to wash up," Mrs. Callahan said. "Supper will be in about an hour. The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but Harrison takes his meals in the dining room. You will eat with him, of course. I will be serving tonight, and then we can discuss a regular arrangement." "I do not want to be a burden," Penelope said. "Child, you are going to be playing piano every day to earn your keep. That is not being a burden. That is employment. Now, do you have anything warmer to wear than that thin dress?" Penelope shook her head, embarrassed. "I thought not. I will find you something of mine to borrow until we can get you some proper clothes. Harrison gave you an advance on wages, I assume. He gave me a silver dollar in town." "That man." Mrs. Callahan shook her head fondly. "I will talk to him about a proper salary. You cannot live on silver dollars dropped in a bowl. Rest a bit, warm up, and I will be back shortly." She left, and Penelope sat on the bed, testing its softness. It had a real mattress, real blankets, even a quilt that looked handmade. She lay back, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the sudden change in her circumstances. This morning she had woken in a drafty boarding house, dreading another day in the cold. Now she was in a warm ranch house, employed with food and shelter and the promise of wages. It felt like a dream. She was half afraid she would wake up back on Howard Street with blue fingers and an empty bowl. A knock at the door roused her. Mrs. Callahan entered with an armful of clothing. "These should fit well enough. A wool dress, a proper coat, some warmer undergarments. I was a bit slimmer in my younger days, but they should do until we can get you something new." "I cannot take your clothes," Penelope protested. "You can and will." "I have more than I need, and you have next to nothing. Let an old woman do a kindness, child." She set the clothes on the bed. "Supper in half an hour. Come down when you are ready." Penelope washed her face and hands in the basin, marveling at the clean water and the actual soap that smelled of lavender. She changed into the borrowed dress, which was indeed a bit loose but infinitely warmer than her own threadbare garment. The coat was heavy wool, lined with flannel, and just putting it on made her feel protected in a way she had not felt in years. She braided her long brown hair, pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them, and made her way downstairs. Voices came from the dining room, and she paused in the doorway. Harrison had changed his shirt and washed up as well. He stood when he saw her, a gesture of manners she had almost forgotten existed. "Miss Jenkins, please sit. I hope your room is comfortable." "It is more than comfortable." "It is wonderful, thank you." He held out the chair for her, and she sat, feeling strange and formal in this setting. Mrs. Callahan bustled in with bowls of stew, fresh bread, butter, and what looked like apple pie for dessert. It was more food than Penelope usually saw in a week. "Eat up, Mrs. Callahan commanded. "You are too thin." Penelope did not need to be told twice. The stew was rich and hearty, full of beef and vegetables, seasoned perfectly. The bread was still warm from the oven. She tried to eat slowly to maintain some dignity, but she was so hungry that it was difficult. Harrison ate at a more measured pace, occasionally glancing at her with what might have been satisfaction. "We should discuss terms," he said. "I was thinking $25 a month plus room and board. You would play for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, and your time otherwise would be your own. Does that sound fair?" Penelope nearly choked on her stew. $25 a month was more than she made in 3 months on the street. That is extremely generous. It is fair wages for skilled labor. You have trained for years to play like you do. That training has value. I also thought if you were willing, you might teach me to play. I would pay extra for lessons. You want to learn piano? I always wanted to, but there was never opportunity. My mother tried to teach me a bit, but she did not play herself, just sang. If it is not too much trouble. It would be no trouble at all, Penelope said, warming to the idea. I would be happy to teach you. Excellent. Then we have an arrangement. He extended his hand across the table, and she shook it, his palm warm and calloused against hers. They finished the meal in companionable conversation, Harrison telling her about the ranch, the cattle, the land. He spoke about his plans for the spring, about possibly getting some horses, about the new barn he wanted to build. Penelope found herself genuinely interested, asking questions, engaging in a way she had not done since leaving Boston. It felt good to talk to someone, to be seen as more than just a street musician or a charity case. After supper, Harrison suggested she play for a while if she was not too tired. I would love to hear more, but only if you feel up to it. I would like that, Penelope said, and meant it. They returned to the parlor where the fire had been built up. Mrs. Callahan brought in lamps, lighting the room with a warm glow. Penelope sat at the piano and played everything she could remember, piece after piece, losing herself in the music. Harrison sat in his chair, eyes closed, listening with complete attention. It was different from playing on the street, where people passed by without really hearing. Here, she had an audience that truly appreciated what she offered. When she finally stopped, her fingers tired but happy, she realized hours had passed. The mantel clock showed nearly 9. I should let you rest, Harrison said, standing. That was incredible. Thank you for sharing your gift. Thank you for giving me a place to share it, Penelope replied. They stood there for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, and then Harrison cleared his throat. Well. Good night, Miss Jenkins. Sleep well. Good night, Mr. Yates. She climbed the stairs to her room, changed into a borrowed nightgown. Mrs. Callahan had left on the bed and slipped under the covers. Outside, the wind howled, but inside she was warm and safe and, for the first time in a very long time, hopeful. The days fell into a rhythm that Penelope found both comforting and surprising. She woke each morning to the smell of coffee and breakfast, came downstairs to find Mrs. Callahan bustling in the kitchen, and ate a meal that still seemed impossibly luxurious. After breakfast, she would practice for an hour, working on technique and new pieces, and then she would play for another hour, filling the house with music. Harrison was usually out working on the ranch during these morning sessions, but she would sometimes see him through the window, pausing in his work to listen. It made her smile, knowing he appreciated her playing even from a distance. Lunch was usually a simple affair, and then she had the afternoons free. At first, she did not know what to do with herself. Freedom was a strange thing when you were used to spending every waking hour trying to survive. Mrs. Callahan, sensing her restlessness, put her to work helping with small tasks around the house. Penelope found she enjoyed the domesticity of it, the simple pleasure of kneading bread dough or mending a shirt. In the evenings, she would play again, and Harrison would be there to listen. Sometimes he would read while she played, his long legs stretched out, a book in his hands. Other times he would just sit and listen, his expression peaceful. They would talk afterward, conversations that ranged from the mundane to the profound. She learned that he loved the land with a passion that bordered on spiritual, that he read everything he could get his hands on, ordering books from catalogs and making trips to Spokane specifically to visit the small bookshop there. That he had a younger sister back east who was married to a banker and kept trying to convince him to move back to civilization. That he had been proposed to twice by women in town who saw a successful rancher and wanted security, but he had politely declined both times because he wanted something more than a business arrangement. She told him about Boston, about her father who had been a music teacher and her mother who had been a seamstress, about the grand piano they had owned, rosewood and ivory, which she had been forced to sell for a fraction of its worth, about the loneliness of traveling west alone, the fear that had accompanied every decision, the small victories that had kept her going. "You are very brave," Harrison said one evening after she had shared a particularly difficult memory. "I do not feel brave. I feel like I have been running and barely staying ahead of disaster. That is what bravery is, keeping going even when you are afraid, surviving when it would be easier to give up." His words settled into her heart, a balm to wounds she had not fully acknowledged. 2 weeks after her arrival, Harrison had his first piano lesson. He was nervous, she could tell, sitting on the bench beside her with his large hands hovering over the keys. "I will probably be terrible at this," he said. "Everyone is terrible at first. That is how learning works." She guided his hands to the proper position, showing him the middle C and the basic scales. His fingers were not naturally suited to the delicate work of piano playing, but he was attentive and determined. They worked through the basics, and Penelope found she enjoyed teaching. There was something intimate about sitting beside him, their shoulders nearly touching, her hands occasionally correcting his position. He smelled of soap and leather and the outdoors, a combination she found increasingly appealing. "You are a good teacher," he said after an hour of practice. "Patient. My mother used to get frustrated when I did not pick things up quickly. You are doing well. Music takes time. You cannot rush it." "Like most things worth having," he said, and the way he looked at her when he said it made her pulse quicken. The first snow came in early December, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Penelope woke to a world blanketed in white, the light reflecting off the snow so brightly it hurt to look at directly. She dressed warmly in the new clothes Harrison had insisted on buying for her during a trip to town, heavy wool and practical boots, and ventured outside for the first time since arriving. The cold hit her immediately, but it was different now. She was dressed for it, prepared for it, and she knew she would be going back inside to warmth and safety. The difference that made was enormous. She walked to the barn where Harrison was feeding the horses. He looked up when she entered, snowflakes caught in his dark hair, and smiled. "Good morning." Could not resist the snow. "It is beautiful. I had forgotten how peaceful it can be. Help me finish up here and I will show you around properly. You have been here for weeks and barely seen beyond the house." They fed the horses together, and then he took her on a tour of the ranch. He showed her the cattle, sturdy beasts who seemed unbothered by the cold, the chicken coop where Mrs. Callahan collected eggs each morning, the workshop where he built and repaired things, the creek that ran through the property, now partially frozen. "In the spring, this whole area blooms," he said, gesturing to a field that was currently snow-covered. "Wildflowers everywhere. It is something to see." "I would like that," Penelope said, and realized she was already thinking in terms of seasons here, of being present for spring and summer, not just surviving winter. They walked back to the house together, and at the porch steps Harrison paused. "I am glad you stayed. I know it was a leap of faith, trusting a stranger, but I am grateful you took the chance." "I am glad too," Penelope admitted. "This has been the best month I have had in years." Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and hopeful, but he only nodded and held the door open for her. They stamped the snow off their boots and went inside, where Mrs. Callahan had hot chocolate waiting and the fire burning bright. Christmas approached, and with it came an excitement Penelope had not felt in years. Mrs. Callahan enlisted her help in preparing for the holiday, baking cookies and pies, stringing popcorn and cranberries for decorations. Harrison brought in a pine tree, and they decorated it together, laughing as they tried to make it stand straight. "My mother loved Christmas," Harrison said, hanging a carved wooden ornament on a branch. "She would make such a fuss about it, cooking for days, singing carols, insisting we read the Nativity story on Christmas Eve. After she died, my father and I sort of let it go. We would acknowledge the day, but there was no joy in it. We could bring some of that back," Penelope suggested gently. "If you want to, I would like that." On Christmas Eve, they invited the ranch hands into the house for dinner, a feast that Mrs. Callahan had been preparing for days. There was roast beef, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and 3 different kinds of pie. The men were shy at first, unsure of being in the main house, but good food and warm company loosened them up. After dinner, Penelope played carols while everyone sang, even the hands who claimed they could not carry a tune. Harrison had a surprisingly good voice, a rich baritone that blended beautifully with the music. When they sang Silent Night, his eyes met hers across the room, and she felt something shift irrevocably in her heart. She was falling in love with him. Perhaps had been falling since the first day he stopped to listen to her play. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning, Christmas Day, Harrison gave her a present. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, clearly done by his own hands rather than a shop. "You did not have to get me anything," she protested. "I wanted to. Open it." Inside was a book, a beautiful leather-bound collection of sheet music by Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin. The pages were crisp and new, the binding sturdy. It must have cost a fortune. "Harrison, this is too much." "It is exactly right. You need new music to play, and you deserve to have the best." "There is something else, too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a smaller package. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a small treble clef pendant. "I saw it in the jeweler's in Spokane and thought of you," he said, his voice uncertain. "If it is too forward, I apologize. I just wanted you to have something that was yours." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "It is beautiful. Will you help me put it on?" She turned, lifting her hair, and felt his fingers brush the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. His touch sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. "I have something for you too," she said, turning back around. "It is not much, but I wanted to give you something." She handed him a wrapped package, much smaller than his had been. Inside was a handkerchief she had embroidered herself during her free afternoons, working by lamplight after Mrs. Callahan had taught her the stitches. She had sewn his initials in one corner, surrounded by a simple pattern of pine trees. "You made this," he said, running his fingers over the embroidery. "It is not very good. I am still learning, but I wanted you to have something handmade." "It is perfect," he said firmly. "Thank you, Penelope." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his voice did something to her insides that she could not quite name. They spent the rest of the day in comfortable companionship, playing piano, reading, talking. Mrs. Callahan served leftovers for dinner, insisting she had done enough cooking for 1 week, and they ate in the parlor by the fire like it was the most natural thing in the world. When Penelope finally went up to bed that night, she touched the pendant at her throat and allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he felt the same way she did. January brought bitter cold and heavy snows that sometimes kept them housebound for days. Penelope found she did not mind. The house was warm and comfortable, and being snowed in with Harrison was no hardship. They spent hours talking, playing piano, reading aloud to each other from books in his library. His piano lessons were progressing well. He could now play simple pieces with both hands, and his dedication to practice impressed her. He would work at it for an hour each day, stumbling through scales and exercises with the same determination he brought to everything else. "You are improving so much," she told him one afternoon after he successfully played through an entire beginner piece without stopping. "I have a good teacher," he said, smiling at her in a way that made her heart flutter. "You are a dedicated student. That matters more." They were sitting close on the piano bench as they always did during lessons, but today the proximity felt charged somehow. Harrison's hand rested on the keys near hers, and she was acutely aware of every breath he took. "Penelope," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "Yes. These past 2 months have been the happiest I can remember, not just because of the music, though that has been wonderful, but because of you. Your presence in this house, in my life, has changed everything. I find myself looking forward to each day in a way I have not in years." "I feel the same," she whispered. "I know I am not a sophisticated man. I am just a rancher, rough around the edges, probably not what a cultured woman from Boston might dream of. But I have come to care for you deeply, and I needed you to know that." Penelope reached out and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Harrison, you are the kindest, most genuine person I have ever met. You saved me from freezing on a street corner, gave me a home, treated me with nothing but respect and generosity. You are exactly what I dream of." His eyes widened, hope dawning in them. "Truly, truly." He lifted his free hand to her face, cupping her cheek gently. "May I kiss you?" "Please," she breathed. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative, asking permission with every movement. She responded, leaning into the kiss, and felt him deepen it, his hand sliding into her hair. It was sweet and passionate, and everything a first kiss should be, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Harrison admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I have wanted you to," Penelope replied, smiling. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is fast, but I do. I love you, Penelope Jenkins, and I want you in my life not as an employee but as a partner, as my wife if you will have me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. And yes, Harrison Yates, I will marry you." He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, only joy and promise and a future unfolding before them. They told Mrs. Callahan that evening, and she promptly burst into tears, hugging them both fiercely. "I knew it," she said, laughing through her tears. "I told you that first day, did not I? I said he had been talking about you for weeks. I knew something would come of it." "You are a wise woman," Harrison said, grinning. "And do not you forget it. Now, when is the wedding?" "We have to plan, get you a proper dress, Penelope. Do you have family you want to invite? We need to contact the circuit preacher, see when he will be back through." "Oh, there is so much to do. We have time," Penelope assured her. "We do not need anything elaborate. Just something simple and meaningful. In the spring," Harrison suggested, "when the wildflowers bloom, we could have the ceremony outside by the creek. What do you think?" "That sounds perfect," Penelope agreed. The winter months passed in a blur of happiness and planning. Penelope wrote to a distant cousin in Boston, the only family she had left, informing her of the engagement. The cousin wrote back with congratulations and a promise to try to make the journey west for the wedding, though the distance made it uncertain. Harrison was affectionate and attentive, stealing kisses when Mrs. Callahan was not looking, holding her hand during evening readings, finding any excuse to be near her. Penelope bloomed under his love, becoming more confident, more joyful than she had been since her parents' deaths. They planned their future together during long winter evenings. Harrison wanted to expand the ranch, build a larger house eventually, maybe start raising horses alongside the cattle. Penelope wanted to teach music, perhaps to children in the area who had no other access to instruction. They dreamed of a family, of children who would grow up surrounded by music and land and love. "How many children do you want?" Harrison asked one night as they sat by the fire. "I do not know. 3, 4, however many we are blessed with. I always wanted a big family. My mother had difficult pregnancies after me, several miscarriages. I was lonely as a boy, wished for brothers and sisters. Then we will fill this house with children," Penelope promised, "and noise and music and laughter." "I cannot wait," Harrison said, pulling her close. In February, a warm spell melted some of the snow, and Harrison took Penelope into Spokane for the first time since she had left. It was strange returning to the town that had been her whole world such a short time ago. They passed Howard Street, where her corner stood empty, the spot where her piano used to sit now occupied by a vendor selling roasted nuts. "Does it feel strange?" Harrison asked, watching her face. "Like a lifetime ago," she admitted. "I can hardly believe I am the same person who sat there in the cold." "You are not the same person. You are happier now, healthier, loved." "Yes," she agreed, smiling up at him. "I am loved." They stopped at the general store to order supplies and at the dressmaker to commission a wedding dress. The seamstress, Mrs. Patterson, was delighted to help, showing Penelope fabrics and patterns, discussing styles and details. They settled on a simple but elegant design in ivory silk, with lace at the collar and cuffs. "You will be a beautiful bride," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "And Harrison Yates is a good man. You are both fortunate." At the bookshop, Harrison bought more sheet music for Penelope and a book on horse breeding he had been wanting. At the jeweler, they selected simple gold bands for the wedding. The jeweler, an old German man named Mr. Schmidt, measured their fingers carefully and promised to have the rings ready within a month. "You are a lucky man, Mr. Yates," he said, winking at Harrison. "Do not I know it?" Harrison replied, squeezing Penelope's hand. They had lunch at the hotel restaurant, a treat that felt luxurious and normal all at once. Penelope ordered pot roast, and Harrison had steak, and they split a piece of apple pie for dessert. Other diners greeted Harrison, clearly knowing him from previous visits, and he introduced Penelope as his fiancée with such pride in his voice that she blushed. On the way home, the wagon loaded with supplies, Harrison was quiet for a while. Finally, he said, "Are you sure about this? About marrying me, leaving behind any chance of returning to city life? I know this is not what you might have imagined for yourself." Penelope turned to him, taking his face in her hands. "Harrison Yates, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are my home now. Not a place, not a city or a ranch, but you. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." He kissed her right there in the wagon, not caring who might see, and Penelope laughed against his lips, happier than she had ever dreamed possible. Spring came slowly to Washington Territory, winter reluctant to release its grip, but eventually, the snow melted, revealing brown grass that gradually turned green. The wildflowers Harrison had promised began to bloom, starting with a few tentative shoots and then exploding into waves of color. Lupines in purple and blue, Indian paintbrush in red and orange, avalanche lilies in white, and countless others whose names Penelope did not know but loved nonetheless. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in May, and as the day approached, the ranch buzzed with activity. Mrs. Callahan had taken charge of the preparations with military precision, enlisting the ranch hands to help set up chairs by the creek, arranging for food and drink, making sure everything was perfect. The circuit preacher, Reverend Matthews, arrived 2 days before the wedding, a jovial man in his 50s who had known Harrison since he was a boy. He stayed in the guest room and spent the evenings regaling them with stories of his travels throughout the territory. Penelope's cousin from Boston, Abigail, managed to make the journey after all, arriving the day before the wedding tired but excited. She was a few years older than Penelope, married with 2 children who she had left with her husband for the trip. The cousins had not been close before, but Abigail's presence meant the world to Penelope, a connection to her past and her family. "He is wonderful," Abigail whispered to Penelope the night before the wedding, after meeting Harrison at dinner. "Handsome, kind, clearly adores you." "You have done well for yourself, cousin." "I have been fortunate," Penelope agreed. "It is more than fortune. You survived terrible circumstances and came out the other side. You deserve this happiness." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Penelope woke early, too excited to sleep, and found Mrs. Callahan already in the kitchen preparing food for the celebration. "The bride should not be up this early," Mrs. Callahan scolded, but she was smiling. "Go back to bed, rest. You have a big day ahead." "I cannot sleep. I am too happy." "Then sit, have some tea, but stay out of my way. I have work to do." Penelope sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea and watching the older woman work. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for welcoming me, for helping plan all this, for being so kind." Mrs. Callahan paused in her work, her expression softening. "You have brought life back into this house, child. Harrison was withering here, all work and no joy. You changed that. You gave him something to live for beyond just surviving. I should be thanking you." Later, Abigail helped Penelope into her wedding dress. The ivory silk fit perfectly, the lace delicate and beautiful. Mrs. Patterson had outdone herself. Penelope's hair was styled with wildflowers woven through the braids, and she wore the treble clef necklace Harrison had given her for Christmas. "You look like a princess," Abigail said, tears in her eyes. "Oh, Penelope, I wish your parents could see you." "I think they can," Penelope said softly. "I hope they are happy for me. They would be. I know they would." The ceremony was set for 3 in the afternoon, when the light was golden and perfect. Penelope walked from the house to the creek on Abigail's arm, her heart pounding with anticipation and joy. Harrison waited by the water, dressed in a new suit, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. His face when he saw her was everything she could have hoped for, love and awe and happiness shining in his eyes. The guests were few but meaningful. Mrs. Callahan and the ranch hands, a few neighbors from nearby properties, Reverend Matthews and Abigail, small but full of love. Reverend Matthews led them through the vows, his voice warm and certain. When Harrison spoke his promises, his eyes never left Penelope's face. "I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. To support your dreams and share your burdens. To fill our home with laughter and music and, God willing, children. To be your partner in all things from this day until my last." Penelope's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to love you with all that I am, to stand by your side through joy and hardship. To make our house a home, to fill it with music and warmth. To be your companion, your helpmate, your love, for as long as we both shall live." They exchanged the simple gold bands, and when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the audience sniffled audibly. The celebration that followed was joyful and spirited. Mrs. Callahan had outdone herself with the food, and someone had brought a fiddle, providing music for dancing. Harrison surprised everyone, including Penelope, by playing a simple piece on the piano he had been secretly practicing for weeks, a wedding gift of his own skill and dedication. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Harrison and Penelope slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to the top of a nearby hill that overlooked the ranch. The land stretched out before them, golden in the fading light, beautiful and wild in theirs. "Happy?" Harrison asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happier than I have words for," Penelope replied, leaning back against his chest. "This morning I was Penelope Jenkins, alone in the world. Now I am Penelope Yates with a husband and a home and a future full of promise." "I love the sound of that, Penelope Yates. So do I." They stood there until the stars came out, talking quietly about everything and nothing, until finally Harrison scooped her up in his arms, making her laugh, and carried her back to the house, to their room, to the beginning of their life together. The first year of marriage was an education in joy and partnership. Penelope threw herself into making the house a true home, adding small touches that reflected both her and Harrison. She hung curtains she had sewn herself, arranged flowers from the meadow in vases, cooked alongside Mrs. Callahan until she could produce a decent meal on her own. She continued to play piano every day, the music becoming the heartbeat of the house. Harrison still took his lessons, improving steadily, and sometimes in the evenings they would play simple duets together, laughing when one of them hit a wrong note. Penelope also began teaching music to children from neighboring ranches. Word had spread about the pianist at the Yates place, and several families approached her about lessons. She started with 3 students, children ranging from 8 to 12, who would come to the house once a week for instruction. She charged modest fees, saving the money in a jar in her room, though she hardly needed it. It was more about sharing her love of music than earning income. Harrison expanded the ranch as he had planned, purchasing more cattle and beginning to breed horses. The work was demanding, but he loved it, coming home each evening tired but satisfied. Penelope would have a bath ready for him, and they would sit together afterward, talking about their days. They grew closer in ways both small and profound, learning each other's rhythms and needs. Harrison discovered that Penelope liked her tea with honey but no milk, that she hummed while she worked, that she had nightmares sometimes about being cold and alone. He learned to wake her gently from those dreams, holding her until the fear passed. Penelope learned that Harrison was terrible at remembering to eat lunch when he was working, that he loved apple pie above all other desserts, that he had a deep fear of failing in his father's eyes, even though the man was gone. She learned to pack him lunch and make sure he took it, to bake apple pie once a week, to remind him that his father would be proud of the man he had become. In October, Penelope realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first she thought it was stress or perhaps she had miscounted, but when another month passed with no sign, she went to Mrs. Callahan. "I think I might be with child," she said quietly, afraid to hope too much. Mrs. Callahan's face lit up. "Oh, child, have you told Harrison?" "Not yet." "I wanted to be sure. Is there a doctor in town?" "Dr. Brennan." "We can go see him tomorrow if you like, but I have seen enough pregnant women in my time to recognize the signs. The glow in your cheeks, the way you have been tired lately. I would bet my life savings you are carrying a baby, Dr. Brennan confirmed it the next day. Penelope was about 2 months along, due sometime in late May or early June. She was healthy. The baby seemed fine, and barring complications, she should have a normal pregnancy. She told Harrison that evening after dinner. They were sitting in the parlor as they often did, and she was working on some embroidery while he read. "Harrison," she said, setting down her needlework, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, processing the information. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and bright it could have lit the room. "A baby, truly, truly. Dr. Brennan confirmed it today. Due in late spring." Harrison crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around. "We are having a baby, Penelope. This is wonderful," she laughed, giddy with his enthusiasm and her own joy. "I thought you would be happy." "Happy does not begin to cover it." "I am ecstatic, thrilled, over the moon." He set her down gently, suddenly cautious. "Should I not have spun you? Is that bad for the baby? I am pregnant, not made of glass. The baby is fine." "A baby," he said again, wonder in his voice. He placed a hand on her stomach, which showed no sign of change yet. "Our child is in there, growing. Yes, in about 7 months we will be parents. I am going to be a father." He looked at her with such love it took her breath away. "You have made me the happiest man alive, Penelope Yates." "You make me happy too. So happy I sometimes cannot believe it is real." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, discussing names and nurseries and all the changes a baby would bring. Harrison was adamant that Penelope should rest more, not work too hard, take care of herself and the baby. She assured him she would be sensible, but refused to be treated like an invalid. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Penelope had some morning sickness in the early months, but nothing severe. As her belly grew, she had to adjust how she sat at the piano, but she continued to play and teach her students. Harrison was endlessly solicitous, constantly worried about her comfort and well-being. "You are going to drive me mad with your hovering," she told him fondly one day when he insisted she sit down after she had been standing for all of 5 minutes. "I cannot help it. You are carrying something precious. I want to make sure you are both safe." "We are safe, I promise. But I need to move around to stay active. Dr. Brennan said so." "Fine. But you will tell me if you need anything. Anything at all, I promise." They set up a nursery in the room next to their bedroom, painting it a soft yellow and furnishing it with a crib Harrison built himself. Mrs. Callahan sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needlework far superior to Penelope's attempts. Neighbors brought gifts, advice, and well wishes. In March, Abigail sent a package from Boston containing some of the baby clothes Penelope had worn as an infant, carefully preserved by her mother. Penelope wept when she saw them, touched by the connection to her parents, grateful they would be represented in some way in their grandchild's life. "Our baby will know about them," she told Harrison. "About my mother and father and your parents too. They will know where they came from." "And they will know they are loved," Harrison added. "So deeply loved." The baby was active, kicking and moving, especially when Penelope played piano. Harrison loved to put his hand on her belly and feel the movements, his face lighting up with each flutter. "I think the baby likes music," he said one evening. "Of course. This baby has been listening to piano since before birth. I expect we will have a musician on our hands. Or a rancher who appreciates music. Either way, they will be perfect." On a warm evening in late May, when the wildflowers were again in bloom, Penelope's labor began. It started with a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified, and by midnight she knew it was time. Harrison rode into town himself to fetch Dr. Brennan, refusing to send one of the hands, needing to do something to feel useful. Mrs. Callahan stayed with Penelope, helping her change into a nightgown, braiding her hair back, offering encouragement. "You are strong," she said. "You can do this." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Penelope had known it would hurt, but the reality of it was almost overwhelming. Harrison returned with Dr. Brennan and wanted to stay with her, but the doctor shooed him out, saying this was women's work. "That is my wife in there," Harrison protested. "I should be with her." "You will be with her afterward with your child. Right now you will be in the way. Go, wait, pace. Drink whiskey if you must, but stay out of the room." So Harrison paced the hallway, wearing a path in the floorboards, flinching every time he heard Penelope cry out. It was torture, being so close but unable to help, unable to ease her pain. Finally, in the late afternoon as the sun was beginning to set, a new sound joined the chorus. A baby's cry, thin and reedy but strong. Harrison's heart nearly stopped. Mrs. Callahan emerged from the room, her face tired but beaming. "You have a son, Harrison, a healthy baby boy, and Penelope is fine, exhausted but fine. You can come in now." Harrison entered the room in a daze. Penelope lay in the bed, pale and sweaty, and the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. In her arms was a bundle wrapped in blankets, and when she pulled the fabric back, Harrison saw his son's face for the first time. He was tiny and red and perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right at Harrison despite being newborn. His little fists waved in the air and his mouth opened in a yawn. "He is perfect," Harrison breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You are amazing." "Penelope, you are incredible. He looks like you," she said, her voice hoarse but happy. "Look at his chin, his nose. He is your son." "Our son," Harrison corrected gently. He reached out and Penelope placed the baby in his arms. The weight of his child, the reality of this tiny life they had created, overwhelmed him. Tears streamed down his face. "Hello, little one. I am your papa, and I love you more than I knew was possible." They named him Henry after Harrison's father. Henry Thomas Yates, born May 28th, weighing 7 pounds, with his father's dark hair and his mother's delicate fingers. He was healthy and strong, and he changed everything. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Henry was a good baby, relatively calm, but he still needed constant care. Penelope fed him, changed him, rocked him when he cried. Harrison helped whenever he could, walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night, singing lullabies he made up, completely enamored. Penelope had to take a break from teaching her music students, all her energy going to Henry and recovery from the birth. She missed playing as much as she used to, but she found she did not mind. This was a different kind of fulfillment, watching her son grow and change day by day. Harrison was an involved father, not content to leave child rearing entirely to the women as many men did. He changed diapers without complaint, bathed Henry with careful hands, took him out to see the horses and the cattle, introducing his son to the ranch that would one day be his. "You are a natural," Penelope told him one evening, watching him cradle Henry while reading a book aloud, even though the baby was too young to understand. "I love him so much it scares me sometimes," Harrison admitted. "The thought that anything could happen to him, that he could get sick or hurt. It terrifies me. I know. I feel the same way, but we cannot live in fear. We just love him and do our best and trust that it will be enough." "It will be," Harrison said firmly. "We will make sure of it." Henry grew quickly, hitting milestones that filled his parents with pride. His first smile, directed at his father, made Harrison weep. His first laugh, a gurgling chuckle at something Mrs. Callahan did, had everyone in the house grinning. When he started sitting up on his own, reaching for toys, babbling sounds that might someday be words, Penelope and Harrison documented everything, committing it all to memory. When Henry was 6 months old, Penelope returned to teaching, though with fewer students and a more flexible schedule. She would place Henry in a basket near the piano during lessons, and he would watch, seemingly mesmerized by the music. Harrison joked that he would be a prodigy, playing concertos before he could walk. The next few years passed in a blur of joy and work and family. The ranch continued to prosper, Harrison's hard work paying off in increased herd sizes and better profits. They were able to hire another ranch hand, taking some of the burden off Harrison and giving him more time with his family. When Henry was 2, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time she recognized the signs immediately, the exhaustion and sensitivity and missed courses. She told Harrison over breakfast, simply and directly. "Another baby," he said, his face lighting up. "Henry is going to be a big brother, it seems so. Are you happy? Are you joking?" "I am thrilled. You are thrilled, right?" "Very much so. Though I will admit I am a bit nervous. Henry keeps me busy enough as it is. We will manage, we always do." This pregnancy was harder than the first. Penelope was chasing after a toddler while growing another baby, and the exhaustion was profound. Harrison took on more of the household tasks, and Mrs. Callahan stepped up as well, watching Henry when Penelope needed to rest. The baby, another boy they named Thomas after Harrison's father's middle name, was born in March. The labor was faster this time, only 8 hours from start to finish, and though still painful, Penelope felt more prepared for it. Thomas was different from Henry from the start. Where Henry had been calm and observant, Thomas was fussy and demanding. He cried more, slept less, wanted constant attention. It was challenging, especially with a 2-year-old also needing care, but they managed. Henry was fascinated by his baby brother, wanting to help with everything. He would bring diapers, pat Thomas's head gently, try to share his toys. It was adorable and occasionally hazardous, requiring constant supervision. "We have our hands full," Harrison said one night after both boys were finally asleep. He and Penelope collapsed into bed exhausted. "We do. But I would not change it for anything." "Neither would I, though perhaps we should wait a bit before having a third," Penelope laughed. "Agreed. Let me survive these 2 first." As the boys grew, the house filled with the noise and chaos Penelope and Harrison had dreamed of. Henry started piano lessons at age 4, showing a natural aptitude that delighted his mother. Thomas, at 2, was more interested in following his father around the ranch, imitating everything Harrison did. "They are so different," Penelope observed one afternoon, watching Henry practice scales while Thomas played with toy horses. "They are perfect," Harrison said, "both of them in their own ways." Life settled into a new rhythm, busy but fulfilling. The ranch was doing well enough that they could hire help for some of the household tasks, giving Penelope more time for music and the boys. Harrison built an addition onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, anticipating a growing family. When Thomas was 3 and Henry 5, Penelope became pregnant for a 3rd time. This baby was a surprise but a welcome one. They had talked about having more children and decided to let nature take its course. 3 children, Harrison said, shaking his head in wonder. "We are going to need a bigger table." "And more patience," Penelope added. "But more love too. Always more love." This pregnancy was the easiest of the 3, perhaps because Penelope knew what to expect, or perhaps because her body was now accustomed to the process. She felt good, energetic, able to keep up with the boys and her teaching and the household. In December, just before Christmas, she gave birth to a daughter. After 2 boys, the tiny girl in pink seemed impossibly delicate. They named her Margaret Rose after both grandmothers and called her Maggie. Henry and Thomas were enchanted by their baby sister, though in different ways. Henry was gentle and careful, singing to her softly. Thomas was more boisterous, needing constant reminding to be gentle. "We have our girl," Harrison said, holding Maggie while she slept. "Our family feels complete now." "It does," Penelope agreed. "3 beautiful children, a home full of love and music. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe it is real. It is real, and it is ours." The years that followed were full and rich. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Henry excelled at piano, eventually surpassing his mother's expectations. By age 10, he was playing difficult pieces with skill and passion. Penelope was immensely proud, though she made sure he knew music should be a joy, not a burden. Thomas loved the ranch as much as his father did, spending every possible moment outdoors, learning about cattle and horses and land management. Harrison taught him to ride at age 5, and by 8 he was helping with actual ranch work, taking pride in his contributions. Maggie, the baby, was a perfect blend of both parents. She loved music like her mother but also loved the outdoors like her father. She could play a simple tune on the piano and then run off to climb trees or chase chickens with equal enthusiasm. She was fearless and joyful, bringing light into every room. The ranch continued to prosper. Harrison's reputation as a fair employer and skilled rancher grew, and the Yates spread became one of the most successful in the region. They were able to save money, invest in improvements, and live comfortably without extravagance. Penelope's music students multiplied over the years. She taught dozens of children, some who went on to pursue music seriously, others who just wanted the basics. She charged reasonable rates and sometimes taught for free when families could not afford lessons. Music, she believed, should be accessible to everyone. Mrs. Callahan remained with them, aging but still vital, now more of a beloved family member than an employee. The children called her Grandma Callahan, and she doted on them with the love of someone who had never had children of her own. One evening, when Henry was 12, Thomas 10, and Maggie 7, the family gathered in the parlor after dinner as they often did. Henry played a Chopin nocturne he had been perfecting, his fingers flying over the keys with confidence. Thomas sat whittling a piece of wood into what might become a horse, and Maggie colored in a book, humming along to the music. Harrison and Penelope sat together on the sofa, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They watched their children, content and grateful. "Do you ever think about that day I found you on Howard Street?" Harrison asked quietly. "Sometimes. It feels like a different lifetime. You were so cold, so thin, but you played with such passion. I knew immediately you were special. I thought you were mad, offering a stranger a job in a home. I almost said no. I am glad you did not. So am I. You gave me everything, Harrison. A home, a family, love. You saved my life." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was drowning in loneliness and routine. You brought color and music and joy back into my world. Everything good in my life now stems from that day I stopped to listen to you play." Penelope lifted her head to look at him. After all these years, after 3 children and a life built together, she still felt that flutter in her chest when he looked at her like that. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too. Forever." Henry finished his piece and Maggie clapped enthusiastically. "Play another, Henry." "Play the one about the raindrops." "That is called a prelude, Maggie," Henry said, but he was smiling, already starting the requested piece. Thomas looked up from his whittling. "Can we go riding tomorrow, Papa? You said we could check the north pasture. We can. Early, though, before it gets too hot." "Can I come?" Maggie asked. "You can come," Harrison assured her. "Everyone can come. We will make a day of it." As the music played and the children chattered and planned, Penelope felt a profound sense of peace. This was what she had survived for, what all the cold days and hard nights had been leading to. This moment, this family, this life. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and milestones. Henry grew into a young man with his father's strength and his mother's artistic soul. He attended college in Seattle, studying music composition, and returned home to teach alongside his mother, eventually taking over most of her students as she scaled back. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Harrison grew older, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. He married a local girl, Emma, who fit into the family seamlessly, and they built a house on the ranch property, staying close. Maggie, the wanderer, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher. She moved to Spokane to teach at a primary school but visited home often, bringing stories and laughter. One by one, grandchildren arrived. Thomas and Emma had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. Henry married a woman he met in Seattle, a fellow musician, and they had twin daughters. Maggie eventually married as well to a school teacher and had a son. The ranch house that had once seemed too big for one lonely man was now filled to bursting during holidays and celebrations. 3 generations gathering around the table. Harrison had expanded multiple times over the years. Mrs. Callahan passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 78, and the whole family mourned her. They buried her in the small cemetery on the ranch, next to Harrison's parents, because she had been family in every way that mattered. Harrison and Penelope grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age, but their love never diminishing. They still sat together in the parlor most evenings, though now they often fell asleep in their chairs, waking to find a grandchild had covered them with blankets. Penelope still played piano, though arthritis made it more difficult as the years passed. Her fingers did not move as quickly or surely, but the music was still beautiful, still the heartbeat of the house. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The house was packed, children and grandchildren everywhere, noise and laughter and music filling every corner. Harrison and Penelope stood in the parlor, surrounded by the people they loved most, and Harrison raised a glass. 40 years ago, I married the most incredible woman I have ever known. She was a stranger playing piano on a street corner, and I was a lonely rancher who needed music in his life. I brought her piano to my warm parlor, and she brought her heart. Everything good in my life has flowed from that decision. To my wife, my love, my Penelope. Thank you for 40 years of music and joy and love. Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the toast. Penelope had tears in her eyes as Harrison kissed her, their children and grandchildren applauding. "Speech, Mama," Maggie called out. Penelope wiped her eyes and smiled. "I was cold and alone and playing for coins when your father found me. He could have walked by like everyone else did, but he stopped to listen. He saw me, truly saw me, when I felt invisible to the world. He gave me warmth and safety and love, and in return, I gave him everything I had. These 40 years have been the greatest gift of my life. To my husband, my heart, my Harrison, thank you for stopping to listen." The party continued late into the night, music and food and family. Henry played piano, joined eventually by his daughters who were learning. Thomas told stories about the ranch that had the children wide-eyed. Maggie organized games that had everyone laughing. When it was finally over, when the last guests had been hugged and sent on their way, Harrison and Penelope sat alone in the parlor. The fire burned low and the house was quiet after hours of noise. "We did well," Harrison said, taking her hand. "We did," Penelope agreed. 3 wonderful children, 8 grandchildren so far, a ranch that thrives, a home full of love. We did very well indeed. Do you ever miss it?" The city, the concert halls, the sophisticated life you could have had. Never. Not once. This life, this family is worth more than any concert hall. You are worth more than anything I left behind. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, hearts full. I would do it all again, Harrison said. Every moment, every choice, every day. If I had to go back and start over, I would make the same decisions. I would still stop to listen to you play. I would still carry your piano to my parlor. I would still fall in love with you. And I would still say yes. To the job, to the proposal, to this life. I would choose you every time, Harrison Yates. I love you, Penelope. I love you too. The fire crackled softly, and outside the stars shone bright over the ranch that had become home, over the land they had worked and loved and passed on to their children. Inside, surrounded by the echoes of music and laughter, two people who had found each other against all odds sat together, grateful for every moment, every memory, every year. The story that had begun with a cold woman playing piano for coins had become a symphony of love and family, of warmth and belonging, of two lives woven together into something beautiful and enduring. And as they sat there in the parlor where it had all begun, where the piano still stood against the wall, they knew that the music would continue long after they were gone, carried on by children and grandchildren who would tell the story of how their grandparents met, how a cowboy carried a piano to his warm parlor, and how from that act of kindness came a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. As Harrison and Penelope entered their twilight years, they spent more time in quiet reflection, often sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the land they had cultivated together. The ranch operations were now fully in Thomas's capable hands, though Harrison still liked to offer advice and occasionally help with smaller tasks. Penelope had officially retired from teaching, though she still gave the occasional lesson to a particularly eager student. Their children visited often, bringing the grandchildren who would run wild over the ranch, exploring the same fields and barns their parents had. Henry would play piano during these visits, filling the house with music as his mother once had. Thomas would take the older grandchildren out to help with ranch work, teaching them the same lessons his father had taught him. Maggie would organize family dinners where everyone gathered around the table, sharing stories and making memories. One spring afternoon, when Penelope was 73 and Harrison 75, they took a walk together to the creek where they had been married so many years ago. The wildflowers were in bloom, just as they had been on their wedding day, painting the landscape in brilliant colors. "Do you remember standing here making our vows?" Harrison asked, his arm around her waist for support as much as affection. "Every word," Penelope replied. "I remember how nervous I was, how happy, how certain I was that I was making the right choice. Were you right?" "Absolutely. Best decision I ever made." They stood there for a while, remembering, grateful for all the years between that day and this one. The wind rustled through the trees, and in the distance they could hear cattle lowing and a hawk crying overhead. "I am glad I stopped that day," Harrison said quietly. "Glad I listened to the music. Glad I had the courage to speak to you. I am glad I was brave enough to say yes, to trust you when I had every reason to be cautious. Sometimes I think about how different my life could have been, how close I came to freezing on those streets. And then I think about everything I would have missed. You, our children, this life. It terrifies me how easily it might not have happened. But it did happen. We found each other and we built something beautiful. We did." As the years passed, their health began to decline, as was natural for people their age. Harrison developed trouble with his heart, requiring him to slow down even more. Penelope's arthritis worsened, making it painful to play piano for extended periods. But they faced these challenges together, supporting each other through doctor's visits and difficult days. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with another large gathering, though this one was more subdued than the 40th had been. Still, the love in that room was palpable. 3 generations gathered to honor the couple who had started it all. Harrison's speech was shorter this time, his energy not what it once was, but his words were no less heartfelt. 50 years, half a century with the love of my life. I am the luckiest man who ever lived. Penelope could not give a speech this time, too overcome with emotion, but she did play one piece on the piano. Her fingers were stiff and the notes not as clean as they once were, but the love and passion were still there, still evident in every phrase. She played the Chopin nocturne she had played the first time Harrison asked her to perform in his parlor, coming full circle. There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished. That night, lying in bed beside Harrison, Penelope felt a profound sense of completion. Whatever happened next, whatever time they had left, she was satisfied. Her life had been full and rich and blessed beyond measure. No regrets, Harrison asked, echoing a question he had asked many times over the years. Not a single one, she replied, as she always did. Harrison passed away on a quiet morning in October, 2 months after their 52nd anniversary. He went peacefully in his sleep, his heart simply giving out after years of faithful service. Penelope had been sleeping beside him and woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, a slight smile on his lips. The grief was profound, a physical ache in her chest that made breathing difficult. After 52 years of partnership, his absence was overwhelming, but she did not fall apart. She had their children to support her, grandchildren who needed her, and a lifetime of memories to sustain her. They buried Harrison next to his parents and Mrs. Callahan in the ranch cemetery, under a large oak tree he had planted when Henry was born. The whole family gathered, along with dozens of others whose lives Harrison had touched over the years. The stories shared that day painted a picture of a good man, a kind man, someone who had made a difference. Penelope lived for another 3 years after Harrison's death. She stayed in the ranch house, cared for by her children who took turns staying with her. She spent her days playing piano when her hands allowed, reading and spending time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, for there were a few of those now. She would often sit in the parlor in the chair that had been Harrison's and remember the cold day he found her, the warmth of his parlor when he brought her home, the sound of his voice, the strength of his hands, the love in his eyes. The life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, year by year. On a spring morning, much like the one on which she had married Harrison, Penelope did not wake up. She passed peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face, the treble clef necklace Harrison had given her so many years ago still around her neck. They buried her beside Harrison, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. The headstone reads simply, Penelope Yates, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, musician. She filled our lives with music and love. At the funeral, Henry played piano, a beautiful original composition he had written in honor of his mother. It was haunting and lovely, full of the warmth and grace that had defined her life. As the music floated over the gathered mourners, many thought about the legacy she left behind, not just in her children and grandchildren, but in the dozens of students she had taught, the countless people who had heard her play, the music that would continue because of her. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking about his mother's strength and kindness, her unwavering love for her family, the way she had turned a cold street corner in Spokane into the beginning of something beautiful. He told the story everyone knew but never tired of hearing, about how his father had found her playing piano for coins in the cold, and had carried that piano to his warm parlor, beginning a love story that had lasted over half a century. Maggie placed wildflowers on the grave, the same ones that had bloomed at her parents' wedding, a connection across the years. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, eventually passing to his son, who ran it with the same dedication and love. The house remained in the family, a gathering place for holidays and celebrations, the piano still standing in the parlor where Harrison had first placed it all those years ago. Henry's daughters, both accomplished musicians, made sure the piano was kept in perfect condition, occasionally playing it during family gatherings. The music continued, just as Penelope and Harrison had dreamed it would. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right through the open windows of the parlor, family members swore they could hear the faint sound of piano music. A Chopin nocturne played with love and passion, a reminder that some love stories never truly end. They just transform into something eternal, passed down through generations, living on in music and memory and the legacy of a life well lived. The story of Penelope and Harrison became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and beyond. It was a story about kindness and courage, about taking chances and choosing love, about how one moment of compassion could change everything. It was a story that began with a woman playing piano for coins in the cold and a cowboy who could not stand to see her suffer. It was a story about a piano carried to a warm parlor, and the music that filled that space, and the love that grew from a simple act of mercy. It was a story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely places, that love can bloom in the coldest seasons, and that when two hearts find each other against all odds, the music they create together can echo through generations, a symphony of hope and love that never truly ends. And in that ranch house in Washington, where the piano still stood and the family still gathered, the music played on, a testament to a love story for the ages, a reminder that kindness matters, that love endures, and that sometimes, if you are very lucky, a cold November day can be the beginning of everything beautiful.